Alright, guys, I watched the new Timothy Chalamet movie, Bones and All. This is directed by, I'm trying to pronounce this correctly, Luca Guadagnino, I guess. He directed Call Me By Your Name, which was an Oscar darling when it came out. Tons of Oscar nominations. I liked Call Me By Your Name quite a bit. It was alright. It wasn't like anything mind-blowing. Kind of reminded me of a pure Italian movie, like a Fellini movie. Just a little bit of the old atmosphere, you know? I can enjoy that from time to time. It's not really my type of movie that I seek out, but it was alright for what it was trying to achieve. But what I really enjoyed from this director was his remake of Suspiria. And I went into that movie ready to hate it, because the original Suspiria is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And is it as good as the original? No, but it tries something different, and at the end of the day, it really is a spooky movie. While the original Suspiria was very stylized and colorful, here comes this movie that's very muted and dark, and it really goes with Luca Guadagnino's style, which is more realism. This movie is about a romance that also involves cannibalism. This young girl is a cannibal at a young age, and her father boots her out of the house for being a cannibal, and she learns to live life independently, meets up with Timothy Chalamet, and they develop a romance that also involves cannibalism. The director of this movie didn't want people to know that this was a cannibal movie. I think for one of two reasons. Potential reason number one, he worked with Armie Hammer, so if he was publicly saying that this is a cannibal romance movie, given that Armie Hammer has some controversies involving cannibalism, I think he was just trying to avoid that. The other reason I think he might try to keep this under wraps is because there's not much cannibalism to it. And the cannibalism just feels like something that's slapped onto the movie rather than something that's integral to the story, which is one of the criticisms I have of this movie amongst many. I think this movie was very dull. I think when I watched the Suspiria remake, I enjoyed Guadagnino's style because it was so muted and realistic. When you compare that to the original Suspiria movie, it makes for something really different. And there was a lot more to compensate for that lack of style. Beautiful dance sequences, for one. But I feel like Guadagnino's muted style in this movie was just very overbearing. Movie opens and you have like this really intense scene of the main actress. I forget her name, but I see her in a lot of movies. And she's at a girls' slumber party kind of thing, and out of nowhere just eats a finger off, and you're like, holy shit, and you're like in it for that. That was a great opening hook. But nothing really feels like that throughout the rest of the movie. Nothing really grips you like that. This is somewhat of a neo-western, somewhat of a romance movie, somewhat of a horror movie. They kind of all just mixed into one. It really reminded me of Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark. The only problem is Near Dark crushes this movie in nearly every aspect. The chemistry between the two leads is more convincing. The genre bending is more interesting. Here you have a cannibal movie, but in Near Dark it was vampires, and how they mix in the vampire mythology with this neo-western was a lot more interesting to me than watching this, which I feel like the cannibalism thing was a bit more of an afterthought, and the rules aren't really explained that well, and when they are explained, it's just for plot convenience rather than actually creating an interesting universe. And also, Near Dark has a lot more interesting characters than this movie, which isn't completely void of interesting characters, but I mean, in Near Dark, you had, like, Lance Henderson, and you had Bill Paxton, and you had the little kid who's a vampire, but he's stuck as a kid. Just stuff like that that plays with the genre. This is trying to play with genre, but doesn't really achieve anything in doing it. It's not really a creative genre-bending experience. Despite me loving horror and loving neo-westerns, those are like my two genres that I go to, it's just so depraved of style and depraved of emotion that I just felt like very passive while watching this movie. And speaking of the chemistry between the two leads, they really don't have any chemistry. It's like Twilight levels of no chemistry, where the two characters are just staring each other in the eyes and you're just like, I don't feel these two leads connecting with one another. I think the actress in this movie I forget her name. I'll put her up on the screen, sorry. But I've seen her in many movies before. I've seen her in Waves, which is one of the few movies I've ever walked out on just because it was very boring. And I've seen her in Escape Room, which is another movie I walked out on. But I walked out on it because it was giving me a headache because there was a lot of strobe light effects. So it's not really to the movie's fault. It was a campy horror movie. It was what it was. But I didn't really buy her. Her performance is very dull. And I don't think it's to her fault, more the fault of the direction. No emotion in this whatsoever. It's a very boring romance. And then you have Timothée Chalamet, who's, I think, miscast in this movie. He's supposed to be like this reject Midwesterner, but I don't really get that from Timothée Chalamet. He's not that. Again, going back to Near Dark, you kind of buy these two leads as these two people that live in the American Midwest. I don't buy these two people as people who live in the American Midwest, especially not Timothée Chalamet, who is dressed like he was in Don't Look Up. And speaking of Don't Look Up, Mark Rylance is also in this movie, and I thought he was very uninteresting. His performance was pulled straight from his performance in Don't Look Up as well. Maybe that's why I didn't like the movie. It kept giving me flashbacks to Don't Look Up. No, but that aside, I just feel like there was just so much realism in this movie that I felt like it didn't work. I needed some kind of emotion in there. Nothing was pulling me. There are some really good set pieces in here. There are some very good moments. The moment where we go to visit the protagonist's mother in a mental hospital, and Chloe Sevigny is the mother. I thought that was really good. And Michael Stuhlbarg, I think that's how you say his name, he's in this movie, and he gives the best performance of this movie. But I just thought the whole movie, it was just very boring and meandering, and you're just like, what's the point? I'm not buying these two leads. I should be into this romance. You know, I'm like, this is one of my favorite genres. I love romance runaway movies. I love movies like Bonnie and Clyde, Badlands, True Romance, Natural Born Killers. Those are my kind of movies. I should be the one connecting with this romance. And maybe it's because I'm getting older and I'm an old chunk of coal, but I don't think it's that. I just feel like the two leads had no chemistry and I didn't really care for their relationship. Yeah, that's how I feel about this movie. It's quite disappointing, given that I really liked Suspiria and Call Me By Your Name, but I just feel like this one was a bit of a misfire. Going forward, I want to see the director do some more stylistic stuff. Just a bit, you know, or just have some emotion. You don't have to keep it completely dry and void of emotion. Yeah. I'm gonna get hate for this one, but I don't give a shit. Guys, have you seen Bones and All? Did you like it? Did you hate it? I didn't hate it. Yeah, I kind of hated it, but yeah, let me know what you think.